We've had a bumpy road up to this point, but now we're at what I consider to be Death Battle's renaissance. I could sing a lot of praises for Season 5. While I can't say I really care for how it started, moments later, we got hit after hit after hit after hit! Seriously, this season has been more consistently good than any previous season, even Season 2, and might actually have a better track record than it too. Granted, my overall top 3 hasn't been touched, but let it not be said that some of the episodes didn't come anywhere close to doing so. Hell, I'm actually gonna go out and admit that there is not a single episode this season that I consider bad. My least favorite from this season, as I'll get into later, was only an okay episode, but there's not much of its kind here. Almost every episode in this season is a good one, or better, and some are legitimately among the best episodes they've ever done. It's fair to say at this point that this season had single-handedly restored my faith in Death Battle after Seasons 3 and 4 left me pessimistic about the show's future. That's just how good it was. It definitely feels like a completely different show from Season 2, sure, but if these praises aren't enough to tell you, I think it's fantastic in its own ways, and I actually think this season turned out better than Season 2 did overall. If this is your first exposure to Death Battle, just know that I'll be spoiling the outcomes of each and every episode in this season. I'll have a playlist linked in the description below so you can watch them, and then we can see if your thoughts mirror mine. If you are familiar with the season already, just know that these are not ranked objectively from worst to best, but rather my least favorite to favorite. With that out of the way, let's get started. Going into Season 5, I wasn't expecting much, especially coming off of Season 4, and especially since they decided to start it off with this matchup. When the episode came out, my expectations felt pretty justified, and it didn't exactly paint a pretty picture for the rest of the season up until it actually got good later on. Black Panther vs. Batman wasn't a bad episode, but it's still one I'd call below average. The choreography is pretty boring and not a lot really stands out. I like the idea of the zoo animals interfering with their fight as it takes advantage of the set piece, but then it feels like they're more concerned about taking them out rather than each other, and it pretty much distracts from the main fight. I do think the death is cool though, with the build-up and the use of voice clips for Black Panther. The decapitation itself is pretty lame though, but T'Challa kicking the rest of Bruce's body into the shark tank was pretty cool. Battle at the Zoo is a fine track, though I'd place it on the weaker spectrum of original tracks as it doesn't stick out much among the crowd and sounds a bit generic. The editing and the analysis is pretty good, and I especially like what they did with the rock wall here. Though in the post-analysis, they say that Batman couldn't counter Black Panther's vibranium armor because he wouldn't use a gun, and even as someone who agrees with the verdict, I can still very easily counter it by saying that it doesn't necessarily need to be a gun. It could be some gadget or whatever that is in a firearm. Genuinely one of the worst arguments they've ever put into a post-analysis. But besides all that, this episode is honestly the most forgettable episode in the season, which is really what cemented it at dead last. I can remember all the other episodes for one reason or another, but with this, I only really remember it for them bringing in Batman for a third time for some ungodly reason, and it's the least interesting thing to me in regards to why I remember every other episode. It goes to show just how unremarkable this episode really is, if the only thing that jumps out to me is an aspect I don't like. Hopefully this will be the last time they ever use Batman, and surely they're not gonna bring him in for a fourth time, right? So, pony episodes. We've got Starscream vs. Rainbow Dash, an episode that I think is mediocre at best, and there is no other pony episode to mention briefly. None whatsoever. So how about we talk about Raven vs. Twilight Sparkle? It's decent, though something tells me I should call My Little Pony the series with the worst track record on Death Battle in terms of the quality of their episodes, despite there only being 2 of them. But I'm getting off topic here. The animation in the library is pretty bad, though. Nothing really packs a punch since the sound design sucks, and sometimes the random flashiness can make my eyes hurt. Thankfully, that segment is brief, and the stuff in the forest is way better. The choreography is decent, Raven's soul self is drawn pretty well, Titans of Magic is a pretty good track, and the scene with Raven being protective over a rock is just funny to me for some reason. Something else I like is how both Raven and Twilight are voiced by the same person here, as a nod to how both are officially voiced by Tara Strong. Kira Buckland sounded fantastic with both, and you probably wouldn't have been able to tell that it was one person voicing the two characters. Sadly, there's not much else I can say that's positive. This is one of few fights we got that were only 2 minutes long, and if you've watched my other lists, you'd know how I feel about that, and the death is just there. I like the build-up, I like the shock of the Soul Self dive bombing into Twilight and the impact from the sound design, but then we cut to how much damage the killing blow did besides kill Twilight, and all it did was tear up some grass, and that lessened the overall impact for me. Yeah, not an episode I'll be coming back to. It's fine, I guess, but still, maybe one day MLP will get a good episode. Perhaps that'll be if Bill's Cypher vs. Discord happens. That sounds like it'll be fun. Despite how low we are on the list right now, we're actually at the episodes I consider good now. While I don't think Crash vs. Spyro is as good as a lot of people say it is, I still think it's a fun watch throughout. The choreography is pretty exciting for the most part, and Crash in particular has some cartoonish movements that fit the vibe very well here. It's fun seeing the abilities used in the fight clash, and I especially liked seeing Crash's mech suit and copter pack and Spyro's different elemental attacks. Dark Spyro was also pretty cool to see, even if he just sort of stomps Crash, but hey, Aku Aku blocking the Dark Ether Breath was a visually cool scene, though its drawback is that it ends in a vaporization death, and those are usually not great. As a result of the choreography being good, I can almost forgive the non-detailed streaks and shockwave effects making an unwelcome return, but I'm not quite there because it still takes away from the action for me. Also, Spyro looks like he has bad aim in this scene, and it's always rubbed me in the wrong way. If you want Spyro spamming fireballs for Crash to dodge, have Crash actually dodge the fireballs instead of just having him run away while moving slightly to the left or right. I don't have issues with the sound design though. Both original tracks for this episode, Off Bandicoot and Crash and Burn, are pretty good. Off Bandicoot sounds like something that came straight out of the Crash games, and being played only during the setup sets the cartoonish vibe very well, and Crash and Burn carries that same feel with it, but also bringing in a more high-octane feel given that it plays during the fight proper. I can get behind the voice acting from Edward Bosco as well, as he sounded like a perfect mix between Tom Kenny's and Elijah Wood's voices for Spyro, and the voice clips for Crash were used pretty well. Overall, I like this episode despite the flaws, so don't get the wrong idea from the low placement. It's just not any higher because there's so many episodes this season that I just like more. Jotaro vs. Kenshiro is pretty good, though it does have its flaws. The sprites are blurry, and the whole thing is only 2 minutes long. The hand-drawn assets are pretty hit or miss. Some of them are actually pretty well drawn, but then there's others like this shot that just don't work for me. But I like this episode regardless. If you couldn't tell from the skit I did for the lead-in, I really like JoJokes, even if I couldn't exactly get into JoJo myself, at least at the time of uploading this video, though seeing a good amount of them in Jotaro's rundown and the fight itself was a treat. The choreography is fun too, with both characters using a good amount of their abilities, and I like how it feels close, making you question what you already knew about these characters. Personally though, I like seeing how Kenshiro deals with Star Platinum. The fight starts, and something's immediately off about his opponent, so he activates Musou Tensei a few moments later, and it feels natural too. And hey, we got what I'm pretty sure most people wanted out of this fight. Aura versus Atatatata. I wish we got to see more moments like it, but it's nice to see it there at all. Also, Bizarre Stars is a good track and feels like it belongs in an official crossover between the two franchises, and both of their themes are remastered in it pretty well. And also, the death is freaking awesome! It's a classic Omaiwamu Shinderu moment, but what else could you really ask for from a Kenshiro victory? I like the flashback to earlier in the fight, and that extra moment to see the close-up of Kenshiro pressing one of Jotaro's pressure points, and everything afterwards feels brutal and I love it. My only takeaway is Jotaro's face looking a little off-model, but that's really it. I wouldn't call this episode as a whole a major hit, but I still think of this as a good episode. Yeah, I did just put all of the first 4 episodes of the season at the 4 bottom spots, though I didn't really intend for that, but I think it really goes to show how much better the season got afterwards. At this point, I'd say I'm no stranger to making controversial placements. In my lists for seasons 2 and 3, I called Yang vs. Tifa and Bowser vs. Ganondorf good episodes despite the verdicts and conclusions for both being really dumb, and I guess I'll say this here since I didn't in either list. While I still enjoy both episodes, I can really only call them guilty pleasures. I bring this up because I think this is the controversial pick for this list, but for the opposite reason. I still enjoyed Mario vs. Sonic 2018, but I would not consider it to be among the best episodes they've ever done. For one, I think the verdict is wrong, and it's hard for me to get behind the conclusion, especially in terms of the speed for both. If I went into why I feel this way, I'd end up stepping into versus debating, something that is subjective, and I'd rather not do that in this video, so I'll talk about everything else instead, and thankfully, it's mostly positives. This was the first episode to feature Wiz and Boomstick in animated form during the analyses, and they looked great. It also opens the door for some fun segments with the two, and a lot of them are really fun. Back to the fight itself, the hand-drawn graphics are great, and the animation is very fluid. Although Mario looks pretty weird in some shots, but that's my only takeaway. The choreography is also pretty good, and gets pretty intense once Hypersonic and the Rainbow Star come into play. Hell, the moon gets cracked in half later. Man, they really have it out for each other because of that one beach chair. My one issue is that there isn't a whole lot of power-ups used in the animation. Mario only uses 4, while Sonic only uses 3, and that's if you want to count Hypersonic. It's really not much, and I would have liked to see more from both. It's something the original has over this, and one of the reasons I prefer that episode to this, even if this is objectively better. By the way, Retro Rivals complements the feel of this fight very well, having many of the different tracks featured in both characters' franchises, while also being a good backing track. Not one of my favorite original tracks, but still a great one. And the voice acting is fantastic. Cameron Nikod was great as Mario, and you'd probably have no idea that he was previously the voice of Sephiroth in his episode. Sure, he's no Charles Martinet, but it's still a damn fine impression. As for Sonic, he was voiced by Nicholas Andrew Louis, who would eventually voice in many other Death Battle episodes to come, and he does fantastically here, sounding like a mix between Jason Griffith and Roger Craig Smith. And the death is pretty cool, I guess. Sonic explodes when hitting the water for some reason, but it is a visually neat explosion, and the eyes on it were a nice touch, and Sonic's severed foot falling into Mario's hands really gets across that he died. The main drawback for me is, well... yeah, if I'm being honest, I never liked that meme. So hearing it as the line Mario delivers before killing Sonic felt like insult to injury, for reasons that should be obvious. Bottom line, the episode is good, make no mistake. The accuracy of an episode doesn't determine whether or not I like an episode, though it can prevent me from liking an episode more. Maybe someday I'll be convinced that the verdict is legit, but even if that were to happen, I don't think I'd place this that much higher. To think I would have placed this episode lower back when it initially came out. Nowadays, I can't seem to decide if this is a good episode or a great one. Samurai Jack vs. Afro Samurai is very well made, all things considered. The hand-drawn graphics are really good, though it does lean considerably heavily towards the style of Samurai Jack, and not much on Afro Samurai, which isn't a bad thing, but it does make the episode seem a little biased towards the former, especially since he won. Though, to be fair, one character was gonna look a little weird either way. But if there's a few things that bother me, it's that Afro is inexplicably missing his #1 headband most of the time, and it's hard for me to not notice. And sometimes, there's some in-between frames missing. Besides those issues, the fight looks great, and the choreography is just as good. It's very fast-paced and very tense, and I like the use of some shots suddenly having cinematic bars, which only adds to the fight. And there's this one moment where the two have friendly banter about how Jack jumps good, and it's just funny to me for some reason. Oh, and Watch Out Samurai is great as a backing track, and boosts how good the choreography is. It feels like something fitting for two samurais doing battle, though sadly, I can't say it's that great on its own. And besides, it spoils the winner if you listen to it before the actual fight, but more on that later. The voice acting is really good. Although it's easy to tell that Keiji Tang is the one voicing Jack if you've heard his other roles, I'd still say that he's pretty solid, and I'd say the same for Devontae Johnson's performance on Afro. If there's one more takeaway I could talk about, it's that the fight is, take a guess what I'm about to say, 2 minutes long. And that's why I can't put this any higher. But I'm debating this being a great episode at all because holy hell, the death is fantastic. Easily the best in the season. There's a one-stroke duel that takes place after the bridge collapses, and here, just watch. God, that might actually be among the best deaths in the series. The fake out, the screams of agony, and the killing blow especially, and I love that last shot of Jack walking away with the #1 headband. If you thought the cut I made was a little abrupt, it's because for some reason, there's this bit that plays Samurai Jack's theme that immediately kills the mood and didn't need to be there, and also didn't need to be in the track. But you know what? This is still a good episode I'd call worth watching. Maybe even a great one if only because the death kinda carried it for me. Still, would love to see more episodes from Drunk Luis. Like I said at the beginning, Season 5 started out as nothing remarkable. We did get Jotaro vs. Kenshiro and Crash vs. Spyro, but neither were particularly groundbreaking to me. This, however, is what I consider to be the first great episode in the season, and the episode that set the whole series back on track, as with one or possibly two exceptions, every episode after this has been at least great. But they're all also episodes I prefer to this, and that's why it's this low. The animation quality in Sora vs. Pit was fantastic, and the choreography was fast-paced and fun to watch. Both use a good variety of their abilities, and it makes for some pretty good spectacle, and the whole thing feels pretty close too. Yeah, sure, Pit does significantly better in the first half of the fight, and the same applies to Sora in the second half, though there's still a decent bit of back and forth even then, and can keep me on the edge of my seat. I also just really like how Skyworld looks here. Something about the cloudy sky, the floating ruins, and the overall rustic look of the place that's really nice to look at. What's also nice to look at is the hand-drawn assets thrown into the fight, particularly this one frame right here. Seriously, it is glorious and a true work of art that should be hung up in every art museum. Also, the voice acting is fantastic. Bryce Papenbrook surprisingly fits for Sora despite not sounding like Haley Joel Osment, though Justin Briner did an absolutely stellar job voicing Pit, sounding like a perfect voice double for Anthony Del Rio. I can't say I'm particularly fond of Nick Kramer's Goofy impression for what little lines he had, but I have reason to believe that it was done on purpose, just going off of the Death Battle podcast. Also, Unlocking Heaven is a very good track and pretty underrated. While it is essentially just a fast-paced rock remix of Dearly Beloved, a track from Kingdom Hearts, it's also done in the style of the Kid Icarus Uprising soundtrack, so it all checks out. Yates did a remaster of this track last year, and I'd say it's even better. You're not hearing it in this video for the sole reason of I'd rather use the versions of the tracks that were used in the fight, but trust me, it's fantastic. As for the death, it's the only time Pit gets to use the silver armor, and given that he loses the beam struggle, which is pretty awesome though, not gonna lie, it makes it disappointing that he didn't get a moment to shine with it. Also, the death being just a simple pierce through the head was pretty lame, so my thoughts on it, meh. Overall, I love this episode just as much as I did when it first came out. I wish I could put this higher, but like I said earlier, everything that's left, I just think is even greater. Season 5 showed me that I should stop feeling pessimistic about the show and just assume that whatever the upcoming episode is at the time won't be anything remarkable. This is one example of an episode I didn't think would be very good, but was absolutely proven wrong on that front, and it ended up being something great. I first watched Leon Kennedy vs. Frank West while on a camping trip with a bunch of my friends and with some really bad bandwidth, so I had to deal with a lot of buffering. But with enough patience, I was able to get through it, and I'm glad I chose to be more tolerant that time around because it meant that I was able to enjoy the episode. So much so that I actually kept rewatching it, even if it meant putting up the bandwidth. That should be the mark of a great episode right there. The fight is incredibly fun, even if some of the motions are a little weird. It's really awesome seeing the different kinds of weapons these two use so things don't get stale, and we even got Frank using an arcade machine for crying out loud. Also, there were zombies interfering with the fight, but I'd argue it's done in a way that doesn't distract from the main fight, unlike Black Panther vs. Batman, since the two are clearly more concerned about taking each other out and only attacking the zombies if one gets too close. The fight is accompanied by Resident Rising as the original track, and it is great to listen both here and on its own. Seriously, that guitar solo at the end was awesome. The occasional banter here is really fun, especially with Frank saying his iconic line about covering wars, you know, only for Leon to come back and say he's fought in them. Badass. This is a good segue for me to talk about the voice acting. Rico Fajardo does a fantastic impression for Paul Mercier when voicing Leon, and Austin Lee Matthews, while not sounding exactly like TJ Rotolo when voicing Frank, I'd argue that he fits into the role and does great with it. And the death? That's where things fall apart for me. I really love the scene with the ice tornado. It shows how Leon deals with really sticky situations while being a badass at the same time. But then he shoots Frank with his rocket launcher and he just stands there and accepts his death. It quite honestly felt very anticlimactic to me. The zombie head in the aftermath was a nice touch though. While I was expecting this to be a 3D fight given the origins of these two, it made for a very solid 2D episode regardless. Another episode to consider among the great ones. We've seen a few different animation styles as the series went on. Sprite fights have been a mainstay since the beginning, and then 3D animation came in and stuck around as well. There was also the occasional fully hand-drawn animation, though far less frequent. Hell, I can actually count how many there are as of uploading this video on one hand. But this episode introduced a style that I don't think most people were even expecting from Death Battle. Live action. Nightwing vs. Daredevil was a really good first impression from Ismahawk, and they picked a good matchup for it too. They both have arsenals that are easy to work with in live action, and nothing too crazy or over the top. Something focused on close quarters combat was a good testing ground for the style, and I'd say it worked. The choreography was great, and there's just something really cool about seeing two dudes doing flips. Also, because it's live action, the moment where the fight takes a few seconds to breathe feels even more realistic than any other moment of the sort would in an animation. And it's really awesome to see Danny Shepard play Nightwing again, and he does just as good as he did in Nightwing the series. Though, not to take the spotlight away from Tyler Tackett's portrayal as Daredevil though, as I think he did really well too. And the costumes for both are very well done. You can see how much passion was put into this fight if you watch the behind the scenes video on Ismahawk's channel, and I'd definitely give it a watch if you're interested in seeing that kind of stuff. By the way, the special effects are really good, and really sold me on how good the fight was. They're very simple, but effective nonetheless. And while there isn't any special effects here, I still think the scene where Daredevil is thrown against some boxes was genuinely cool. As for the fight track, Devil of the Night is fantastic as a backing track. Being purely orchestral, it fits the live-action set piece and makes it feel more cinematic, but it is not something I'd go out of my way to listen to on its own. And the ending? Okay. I really love the lighting here, how it's all red, but also easy to tell that it's pitch black in actuality, and the whole thing just feels very tense. And I love the idea of Daredevil falling into Nightwing's trap, and it's all executed flawlessly. The sound effect for the ultrasonic wingdings is fitting for what it's supposed to be doing, and the special effects for the electricity surrounding Nightwing's hand is top-notch. But everything falls apart on the killing blow. Daredevil gets punched in the face and it snaps his neck, killing him, and it's quite lame if I'm being honest. And it's not like you can't have a brutal death in live action. Hell, I think it would have been a lot cooler if Daredevil's head went flying off instead. Ismahawk was able to have a guy decapitated before, so I'm sure they could have pulled off something. Though if I'm being honest, I didn't actually dislike this death on my first watch. Funny story about that, by the way. I was watching it on my phone at my old private school. It's complicated. And just when the killing blow hit, the fire alarm went off as there was a fire drill happening that day, and it somehow enhanced the experience and made it feel pretty awesome. Though nowadays, I'm not watching the show in areas where fire drills are conducted, and it's not like I'll ever get that timing down ever again anyway, so now I feel that it was lackluster. Though it's really the only drawback the episode has. It was a great episode that I'll happily come back to every now and then nonetheless. Anyone ever wished you could watch two perverted old men fight to the death? Well, now you can. Roshi vs. Jiraiya was so much fun to watch. Between the choreography being really good and the banter they have at the beginning being about Jiraiya's porn books and not having any pictures, it's all great. I mean, come on, we all know that Roshi was looking for porn in that store. And speaking of, what I consider to be the funniest animated segment of Wiz and Boomstick in this season is Wiz using sexy jutsu to catch Boomstick off guard. I don't know why, I just find it really funny. Anyway, the animation quality is pretty good, even with the occasional hiccup here and there, regardless of how noticeable they are, which most of them are, but besides those, the animation is fine. Plus, I just really enjoy how intense the fight itself is as the two trade blows, and it's pretty cool seeing all of their techniques bouncing off of each other. Hell, Jiraiya even uses a summoning jutsu, and the exchange with Gamabunta is great. Oh yeah, I feel I should mention that every bit of banter in the fight is amusing, though I personally love the reveal of Roshi fighting a shadow clone throughout that whole time he was at Kame House, or how Jiraiya chooses to put it.
You have no idea. I've been back on the beach the whole time.
Classy. Oh yeah, I feel I should talk about the voice acting too. Sure, it would have been cool if Nick Landis reprised his role for Roshi from DBZ Abridged, but I think Patrick Rodriguez was excellent nonetheless. And Jonah Scott, while sounding different from David Lodge, still does a great Jiraiya voice. And for what little time he was there, Stephen Kelly was excellent in voicing Gamabuta, really amplifying the enjoyment of his scenes. Oh, did I mention that all of Gamabuta's assets were hand-drawn? Well, they all looked great, and I'd say the same for the occasional close-ups of Jiraiya. And by the way, the fight track, Turtle and Toad, is freaking awesome. It's super high energy and fits both characters, and thus is great as a backing track and on its own. And then the death. Okay, listen. I love the scene with the Toad confrontation chant. It raises the tension and can make one think Jiraiya could pull off a surprise win. But holy shit, this is the 4th time in a row and the 6th time in this list overall where I think the build-up is good, but then the killing blow itself ends up being boring, and we're still not done with the deaths that fill that category. The issue here is that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Roshi's body is somehow still able to hold a fist even without his soul intact, and was somehow able to punch Jiraiya in half. Season 5, I love you, but this issue is getting a little annoying. The laugh Roshi does at the end was nice though. The fight does have issues, but it's still something I love regardless. Thankfully, this episode was not a victim of penultimate syndrome. This season's too good for that. Here we have a unique matchup that we haven't seen up to this point. Unique in the sense where you can't determine who would win using their stats in physical strength, speed, or durability, but rather, how good their AIs are at infecting other AIs. This episode handled that really well. Ultron vs. Sigma was f***ing great. Hell, I almost want to call it excellent. Since we don't seem to get army fights anymore, it was really cool seeing the Ultron drones and Mavericks going at it, for as briefly as we saw it anyway. But still, it gave that part of the fight a dynamic feel. The main choreography between Ultron and Sigma was great. Seeing Sigma using his different weapons was fun, and the entrances both giant forms make feel pretty intimidating, and I like it quite a bit. One thing I do want to ask though is where the hell is Ultron's arm in this scene? It looks abruptly cut off and just looks so unnatural. That's really the only part of the animation that is jank, as everything else about it is great. Makes the fight feel super fast and exciting to watch. It's all helped by Infection Perfection being such a fantastic track, both on its own and as a backing track. Seriously, it might be one of the best tracks in the season. Something about original tracks having lyrics just somehow makes them better for me. Also, I really enjoy the voice acting here. Having voiced Frank 5.5 months prior, Austin Lee Matthews comes back to voice Ultron, and he once again does a stellar job. And just like Ichigo before him, Sigma is speculated to have been voiced by his official voice actor in Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, Chris Tergliafera, but wasn't credited to avoid legal issues. Nice to know that Gundam Tanaka from Danganronpa sometimes does voice acting in his spare time though, according to the credits. Wonder how he'd feel about his character losing though. Yeah, I guess this is a segue to talk about the death. It's great. We cut to the inside of Ultron's mind where the Sigma virus tries to infect him and possess him, but then the opposite happens. See, because it's AIs, I think Ultron having the Sigma virus rewritten in his image counts as a death, and it's visually neat. I like it. I also like how the war between the drones and Mavericks just ends in a truce as a result of what happened to Sigma, and it's all unanimously Hail Ultron. Though the Mavericks having Ultron heads does look pretty weird though, not gonna lie. What else can I really say other than that I loved this episode overall? Even if I called this an excellent episode, what's above this is even more so. I think we all knew that this was going to be the season finale the moment they announced that it would be the most requested matchup. And quite honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. Man, Thanos vs. Darkseid was freaking awesome! There was actually a time where I adored it, but a good few issues did crop up and they bumped the episode a few spots down, and I'll get to those later, but I still really love it overall. The fight feels super destructive, and I'm admittedly a sucker for this kind of stuff, and that's the big reason why I love the action here. Even when they're still on Earth, everything feels especially impactful. My favorite part of it is when some buildings are weaponized because it felt fast and exciting to watch. Not to mention, the visuals are jaw-dropping. This is the second episode to be animated using the Unreal Engine, and quite honestly, I love this change, as it was not only easier to work with, but also made the 3D episodes going forward look absolutely beautiful. Plus, it means the placeholder effects are no more. Thank God. My only issue with the visuals of the fight is Thanos looking blue in a lot of shots when he's supposed to be purple, but that's really not something that genuinely bothers me, when in hindsight it should, but I'm glad it doesn't. The space section was also a fun watch. When I said I'm a sucker for destruction, I especially meant galactic destruction, and that's what's happening here. Both characters are weaponizing the solar system, and it's super cool to see. The sound design may not feel that impactful for the planets breaking, but look how much bigger Thanos and Darkseid are than them. Planets breaking on the two should feel insignificant to them in the context of the scene, and quite honestly, the sound design does a good job in that aspect, really selling that they are cosmic gods after all. What holds the scene back for me is that there's some jank here and there, and also some awkward cuts. Like Thanos throwing a planetoid at Darkseid. Not Jupiter, since that's a gas planet, and Darkseid is clearly able to touch it, and it's way smaller than the planets shown when Jupiter is f***ing huge. And the black hole scene also suffered an awkward cut, and Darkseid's hand grabbing the edge of it looks pretty weird. Though I did like the imagery before the cut. Holy shit, that looks great. Also, oh, 6-minute long fight animations. Oh, how I've missed you! Seriously, can these please be more frequent again? Anyway, the voice acting is fantastic. Justice Washington was phenomenal as Thanos, really selling the intimidation he gives off as a cosmic god, and the same applies to Edward Bosco when voicing Darkseid. If the latter's name sounds familiar, yes, he was the voice of Spyro in his episode, and having done great as both proves he has range. Kings of Infinity is considered by a lot of people to be unfitting as a backing track, but I quite honestly disagree. It fits the intimidation of the two being cosmic gods and helps with the intensity of the fight in my opinion, as it's actually decently high octane. Plus, I really like it on its own too. And the ending. It's a bit off-putting when you notice that Darkseid's avatars just appear without any kind of effect when the camera could have easily obscured them popping into existence. And the scene with the Omega Beams has also looked weird to me, though I do like Thanos snapping being completely useless. And the death itself. Thanos is now in the Omega Sanction, where he now has to live an infinite amount of lives that get progressively worse, including how he dies. A lot of people hate how he dies here, but I'm actually gonna stick up for it. Thanos wants to die in a way that's grandiose, but the Omega Sanction doesn't allow for one to die in the way they'd prefer, so given that a bullet in the chest is enough to kill him, it's fitting for the context. It definitely feels unceremonious, sure, but I'd argue that it's pulling off being unceremonious well. Not a top-tier death, but I still like it. Though an actual issue is the bullet not leaving a visible mark. What the f***? Oh, what am I kidding? Thanos' corpse is an inside joke between me and some of my friends, and it's the best inside joke I could ever ask for, so now I'm moving this episode to number 1. Screw whatever the other 4 episodes are, this episode has Thanos' corpse, and they do not. In fact, I'm not even gonna talk about them, so the list is over now. Bye-bye. But for real, this was an excellent episode, even with its flaws. I'm gonna move on though, because this segment has gone on long enough. This season was mostly composed of matchups that were among the top 10% of most requested episodes. Keyword being mostly, as there were 2 exceptions. One was Leon vs. Frank, and the other was this episode. It quite honestly makes me miss when they threw good curveball matchups at us because holy f***, Carnage vs. Lucy is so good! This was an episode I was anticipating when it was first announced, as it was introducing Elfen Lied, a series I hadn't watched at the time, but knew it was an absolute bloodbath, yet didn't really consider as a potential franchise for Death Battle. I was pretty excited for what this episode could bring in terms of the chill factor and how much blood would be spilled, and it delivered. The action is really awesome. It shows how dangerous these two are, and why they should be feared, and there's this chilling atmosphere that sticks around for the whole fight, and I love it. Seriously, that setup sets the tone amazingly, especially when the train doors open to reveal Carnage and the blood of his victims. Sure, Carnage doesn't get a whole lot of hits on Lucy, while she gets a lot of hits on him, but his confidence in that he knows that he just needs one hit to win is what makes this fight feel even in my eyes. The original track, Chorus of Carnage, also helps the atmosphere in sending chills down your spine, and fitting for both characters. It's a fantastic track, both here and on its own, and the remaster from last year is also just as good, if not better. The animation quality is great too, with a lot of hand-drawn assets thrown in, and they only serve to make the fight even more dynamic than it already is. Seriously, they're all very well done. And the voice acting is stellar too. Chris Guerrero was fantastic as Carnage, getting across how much of a monster he is, and gets chills to run up my spine with some of his deliveries, particularly the Carnage's starving monologue. Ben Singer posted his unaltered takes on Twitter and claimed that he thought Chris might be an actual demon. And Danielle McRae was also amazing as Lucy, making her sound just as intimidating as her opponent. I especially liked her delivery on what she says before killing Carnage. Man, what is with all these convenient segues for talking about the death? It's... And no, I'm not saying that because it's a vaporization death. Quite honestly, there's no other way you can kill Carnage besides that. Anyway, like I said, I like what Lucy says before sending out the killing blow, giving off the impression that she is the true monster compared to Carnage. But the problem is that it doesn't do a good job on selling that Carnage died. One shot of him being vaporized would have been enough, but all we get is just the scale of the explosion, which is still really cool to see, but it wouldn't hurt to have both. Besides the death, this episode is phenomenal, and I think I like it more than I did when it first came out. It's an episode I can call one of my favorites of all time, but the next three are just even better in my eyes. It's been a hot minute since there was an episode I consider to be among my top 10 favorite episodes of all time. Other episodes happened and bumped this episode out, so it's not there anymore, but it's fair to say that I still adore this fight. Doctor Strange vs. Dr. Fate was such a fun episode to revisit. Not only did the analysis have some jokes I found to be funny, but the fight is just spectacular. There's a lot of spells being cast from both, and they're all very pretty to look at, and while there's a lot of hand-to-hand, it's mostly when they're warping to all sorts of different locations, which, again, are pretty to look at, especially the Bifrost Bridge of Asgard. Plus, I just really like listening to Strange reciting incantations during that part of the fight, so there's still spells being cast. Sure, there's some untapped potential, but the spells used still felt numerous and enough to me. Though, the middle part where they're warping around is admittedly the weakest part of the fight. The first and last thirds were the highlights for me, not just because of the choreography, but also the banter. Both characters talking back to each other and being overall cocky is a lot of fun to listen to, and I can safely say that I enjoyed every line. But come on, the sneak peek told us that they were fighting over pizza, and we never got that in the animation. Come on, guys! But yeah, the dialogue is boosted by some great voice acting from Damon Mills and Mike Farker as Strange and Fate, respectively. The former of which even sounded pretty spot on for Benedict Cumberbatch. Also, I feel I should mention, this is the first episode to be worked on by more than 2 animators at the same time. Past fights have had a second person working on them, sometimes as assistants, but this was the first episode to have most of the animators they had at their disposal work on the same fight as a full-on team. I'm glad they chose to do this for every episode going forward, as it meant they could be more consistently good than ever before. As for A Strange Fate, it's a good track, bringing in a good amount of mystical elements, but it's overshadowed by a lot of tracks in my opinion, so I can't not say it's among the weaker tracks. Now, the ending. I love the stuff that preceded it, with a lot of good hand-drawn segments, and Strange thinking he's permanently depowered Fate, only for the helmet to come back from where it fell. And also, true Fate being so powerful that even his presence alone is enough to overwhelm Strange is kind of terrifying. I like Strange knowing that he would eventually be completely overwhelmed, and thus tries to take Fate out from within his helmet, only for that to be his undoing. Yeah, it's another disintegration death, but this one feels super impactful, if only because of Strange's screams echoing in the background. It's kind of haunting, but I like it. And Strange's physical body laying dead on the ground and crumbling to dust? Yeah, you get the picture. This is a great death in my opinion. I find this episode to be underappreciated overall, as it's fantastic from start to finish. However, this is as high as I can put it because the 2 episodes that are left are just even more amazing. I was genuinely surprised by how much I really loved this episode when it first came out. When it was announced, my reaction was pretty dour. I didn't think Ryu needed to come back when his fight with Scorpion was already amazing. I didn't like how it was in 3D because I didn't think the more recent stuff in that style was that good at the time, and I was expecting it to be underwhelming because of it. I was also not very impressed by what was shown in the sneak peek because my mind kept focusing on that one clipping issue with Ryu's fist, which is petty, I know, but that's just how my mind worked at the time. Point is, there was a lot going against this episode for me, but when it came out, you have no idea how pleasantly surprised I was with how absolutely amazing the final product was. It still amazes me how good Ryu vs. Jin is. Even the stuff shown in the sneak peek that I wasn't a fan of initially, I began to appreciate. Well, the bit with Ryu's fist is still jank, but that's just 1 second of the animation, out of 225. It starts off with the two just being simple martial artists doing battle, while occasionally popping special moves. A bit mellow, but still very effective at the same time. As the fight went on though, the special moves became more and more frequent, and then it gets more and more exciting, and it all comes to a head when Devil Jin and Evil Ryu come out, and all the while, the sound design makes sure you felt the impact of almost every attack. The fight that ensues in the Haven Vault put the Ruby fight that took place in the same location to shame. Yeah, Ruby, Rooster Teeth's flagship series. Its best fight from the 5th volume was completely overshadowed by what Torian and his team did in this fight, even using the same set piece with all the falling rocks, which only made the fight crazier and more amazing. The Ruby fight was still great in its own right, but this was something else. Yeah, I should mention that just like how Strange vs. Fate was the first 2D episode to be worked on by a team of more than 2 people, this was the first 3D episode to be worked on by a team of more than 2 people. A very welcome change, I should add. Christina Christopherson and David Fisher both made fantastic first impressions with this episode, and I'm glad they're still on the team to this day. The latter of which is something that cannot be said about Torian nowadays, though we did think he was going to leave after this episode, and it would have been a great send-off, but I digress. Them and every other 3D animator they've hired throughout the years have been great. Also, gone are the placeholder effects that bogged down every fight they were in to varying extents, and replaced with these absolutely stylish and beautiful effects that have only enhanced the fight. Artistic, yet detailed. Oh, and Fight Like a Devil f***ing slaps, and might be my second favorite original track in the season. It's another rap piece, but it still sounds very intense and fitting for both, and it is a joy to listen to, both on its own and in this fight. Also, this is a rare instance of a 3D fight not having any voice actors. It would have been cool, but as Ryu himself has stated, talk is cheap. Besides, the voice clips used make me think I wouldn't have had it any other way. Also, the death is another instance of great setup, lame killing blow. I love the scene of Ryu tapping into the power of nothingness. Everything goes dark to focus on the gracefulness he's now feeling as a means to use his strongest form, and it's great. The first attack on Jin was really freaking awesome, but the Shinku Hadouken afterwards felt a little abrupt and doesn't really look like a kill move solely because of how big it is compared to Jin, and it doesn't look like it's piercing through his chest. Oh, and the hole there is borderline impossible to see without freeze framing, so I hope the trail of blood Jin's body leaves behind is enough to tell you that he died. Really wish we were able to see the hole more clearly, but that's the only issue I have with an episode that's a masterpiece otherwise. Quite honestly, I'm not sure which Ryu episode I like more. Right now, it's this one, but I go back and forth between the two a lot, so that isn't really set in stone. It was definitely close to being number 1, but what's already there just slightly edged it out. With everything I've been saying, it would be reasonable to assume that Season 5 is my favorite season of Death Battle. And to that I say, yeah, one could get that impression, and it's certainly a good guess, but I actually like Season 6 the most, though this is a very close second. This season, being as good as it is why I chose to stick with the show in the end, and I'm glad they've been able to keep up this trend for so long, and that's why I'm still watching the show to this day. It's also been the most innovative season in recent memory. It was when the animation teams were established for both of the main animation styles. It was when we got more hand-drawn animations, including the 100th episode, and even some of the sprite animations would adapt this style from time to time. It was when we got our first live-action episode, and it was when the 3D team would switch to a new program, the Unreal Engine. I already went over why I love this change, but this is where it was first used. And I gotta say, it was a phenomenal first impression. Right now, this is in my overall top 10, but I sadly can't tell you exactly where it is though. But one thing's for certain, it is what I believe to be the best episode of Season 5. Sweet Lord, Optimus Prime vs. Gundam was amazing! Not only is it the best looking episode in the season, but also has action that I'd call among the best in the series. Seriously, look at the graphics of the space scene. It's pure eye candy right there with how vibrant all the colors are. Plus, the choreography gets my blood pumping every time I rewatch the episode. And since we're now using Unreal, the effects are super detailed. making it feel like we came a really long way from Season 4, and that was only a year prior. Although the scene on Earth is noticeably less vibrant, everything's still pretty to look at, and besides, the action is just more exciting to watch than it already was. Not a bad trade-off. And having the shots of the Gundam's cockpit be hand-drawn was a very nice stylistic choice. Despite the change in animation styles that do occur throughout the fight as a result, it's not jarring, nor does it break the pacing, plus it's all very well done, making the whole fight feel very well put together. The sound design features some classic sound effects found in both Transformers and Mobile Suit Gundam, and they play exactly where you'd expect. The Gundam makes Gundam noises, don't know how else to explain it, and the classic transforming sound plays when Optimus transforms, just to name a few. It really helps make the characters feel like the characters in this scenario, and can make one feel a little nostalgic. It's also good at its job in general. The voice acting also helps with the characterization spectacularly. Although Richard Bossanis and David Matranga sounded a little different from how Optimus and Amuro sound normally, they also sounded similar enough so that they get the job done, and the former especially has some fun dialogue. Hell, the writing even worked in his iconic "one shall stand, one shall fall" quote, though it was altered slightly, but still effective given the context of Optimus saying that as he sends out the killing blow. Yeah, I think the death is really good. That line, combined with Amuro panicking as he's about to die, and the resulting explosion of the blast that's super detailed, my god. And the last shot of the Gundam's head that really gets across that it was destroyed. Solid death all around, but no one tell Optimus that the Decepticon, in quotation marks, was being piloted by a human, alright? And what makes the fight even better, and what I consider to be the best part of the fight, hence I've chosen to save this for last, is the original track. Wings of Iron is my favorite original track in the season, and among the best original tracks in the series. In fact, this is what surpassed EXO in my eyes, making this my all-time favorite original track for a good while. It genuinely sounds like something that came straight out of the 80s, which is where these two originated after all, and it's just absolutely kick-ass in general. Makes you want to sing along. There isn't any particular reason why this is at number 1, especially since Ryu vs. Jin and Strange vs. Fate were also deserving of the spot, but this is what I prefer to every episode of the season, and putting it here is what I've decided. It was definitely a close call, but this is what I've chosen to give the title of Best Episode of Season 5. And just like that, the list is over. Surprised I was able to get this done so quickly compared to my lists for Seasons 3 and 4. I guess when it's a season where you enjoy almost every episode, the project becomes more fun to work on as a result. As for the Season 6 list, you can expect that to come out later this month or in September. For now, leave a like if you enjoyed, comment what your opinions on these episodes are, subscribe, and yeah. Until then...